I couldn't breathe. My heart raced every time my phone buzzed. Bills, reminders, threats of collection, each one hitting me like a ton of bricks. I felt like I was drowning, sinking deeper into a financial abyss I couldn't escape. $10,000 in debt, 6 credit cards maxed out, and rent due in a week. I had no savings, no plan, and no way out, or so I thought. 6 months later, I would be debt free. This is the story of how I did it. Let me take you back to the day it all started, the day I hit rock bottom. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was at work, sitting in a noisy office filled with people talking about weekend plans. I was pretending to be busy, staring at my computer screen, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. In reality, I was thinking about how I was going to pay my rent next week. I hadn't told anyone how bad things had gotten, not my friends, not my family. I was too ashamed. How had I let it get to this point? I was responsible, right? I had a good job, but somehow I'd let $10,000 in debt creep up on me like a slow-moving storm that suddenly turned into a hurricane. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed and I saw an email notification. Final warning, payment overdue. It was my credit card company. They were threatening to send my account to collections. My heart dropped. I stared at the email, frozen, not knowing what to do. Tears welled up in my eyes as the panic set in. I couldn't let this happen. I knew if I didn't act now, things were going to spiral out of control and I might lose everything. I excused myself from the office and locked myself in the bathroom, where I sobbed uncontrollably for 10 minutes. That was my breaking point. I had no choice but to face the harsh reality I'd been avoiding for months. I was in financial freefall, and no one was going to catch me. But at that moment, as I sat there with my back against the cold tile wall, I made a decision. I was going to fight back. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined. I had 6 months to pay off $10,000. No excuses, no distractions. I wasn't going to let my debt destroy me. The first thing I did that night was lay out all my debts on the kitchen table. I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts. Credit cards, student loans, utility bills. I made a list of every single one, the total balance, the interest rates, and the minimum payments. Seeing it all in one place was like getting punched in the gut. I had never truly faced the numbers before. I had been hiding from them. $2,300 on one card, $1,000 on another, $3,500 in student loans. It all added up to $10,000. But instead of wallowing in despair, I started asking myself the right questions. How had I let it get this bad? Where was my money going? Why couldn't I make ends meet despite having a steady job? I needed to figure this out before I could make a plan. That's when I discovered the real problem. I had no idea where my money was going. I was spending mindlessly, eating out multiple times a week, buying clothes I didn't need, and subscribing to streaming services I never watched. I was nickel and diming myself into debt without even realizing it. I needed a budget, but not just any budget. A budget that would force me to pay off my debt as quickly as possible, even if it meant making painful sacrifices. The first step I took was to track every single penny I spent. I downloaded a budgeting app, and for the first time I started logging every purchase. From my morning coffee to the Netflix subscription, nothing escaped my attention. Within a week I realized I was bleeding money in places I never even thought about. $7 here, $12 there, it added up fast. Seeing it all laid out in front of me, I knew what I had to do. I went into full survival mode. The first thing I did was slash my spending to the bare minimum. I called it my austerity budget, and it was brutal. I cancelled every non-essential subscription. Goodbye Netflix, Hulu, and Spotify. I started cooking all my meals at home, even though I hated it. No more Starbucks, no more DoorDash. I brought my lunch to work every single day, no exceptions. Next, I cut out all social spending. No more going out with friends, no more weekend trips, no more happy hours. I couldn't afford it, and honestly, I couldn't handle the temptation. Every time I spent money on something frivolous, it felt like I was moving further away from my goal. I also made a rule: every extra money I saved or earned would go directly toward my debt. I had no emergency fund, no savings, but I didn't care. The debt was my emergency, and I treated it as such. That's when the real sacrifice began. Cutting expenses wasn't enough. I knew I needed to make more money if I wanted to pay off $10,000 in just 6 months. So I got creative. First, I picked up a part-time job delivering groceries on the weekends. It wasn't glamorous and it was exhausting, but it paid the bills. I started working late nights, weekends, whenever I could fit in the extra hours. I didn't care if I was tired. I had a goal and nothing was going to stop me. Then I started selling things I didn't need. I went through my apartment and listed everything I hadn't used in the last 6 months on eBay and Facebook Marketplace. Old clothes, electronics, furniture, it was all fair game. I even sold a designer handbag that had been sitting in my closet for 2 years, collecting dust. It hurt to part with it, but I needed the cash more than I needed the bag. I also tapped into my skills. I was decent at graphic design, so I started offering my services on freelance platforms like Fiverr and Upwork. I didn't make a fortune, but every little bit helped. I took on small projects, designing logos, creating social media posts, and funneled all the extra money toward my debt. But let me be real with you, it wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up. Days when I felt like I wasn't making any progress, even though I was sacrificing so much. I was tired, I was lonely, and I missed the things I used to enjoy. There were moments when I would scroll through Instagram, seeing my friends out at bars, on vacations, buying new clothes, and I felt a pang of jealousy. I wanted to be out there with them, living my life, but instead I was working 2 jobs, eating ramen noodles, and pinching pennies. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I wanted freedom. I wanted peace. I wanted to stop being a slave to my debt, and every month, when I saw the balance on my credit cards go down, I felt a little more hope. After 3 months of grueling work, I started to see real progress. My smallest credit card balance, $200, was completely paid off. The moment I saw that zero balance, something clicked. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, I realized that I could do this. I could pay off all my debt if I just kept going. That's when I discovered the debt snowball method. The idea is simple. You focus on paying off your smallest debts first, regardless of interest rates. The psychological boost you get from eliminating an entire balance gives you the momentum to tackle the next one. I applied the snowball method to my remaining debt. After paying off the smallest credit card, I used the money I was putting toward that payment to tackle the next smallest balance, and so on. By month 5, I had paid off $7,000 of my debt. The finish line was in sight, and I was more determined than ever to cross it. The last $3,000 was the hardest. I had already cut my expenses to the bone, and I was working as much as I could. But I was so close I could taste it. That's when I made one final sacrifice. I moved out of my apartment and into a tiny room in a shared house with 3 other people. It was cramped and I had 0 privacy, but it cut my rent in half. That extra $500 a month was the final push I needed. I threw every last coin at my debt, and 6 months to the day after I started, I made my final payment. The day I became debt-free, I sat in my car and cried tears of joy. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight that had been crushing me for so long was finally gone. But paying off $10,000 in 6 months wasn't just about getting rid of my debt. It was about taking control of my life, about proving to myself that I was capable of doing hard things. I had made sacrifices, yes, but I had also learned invaluable lessons about discipline, perseverance, and self-control. Now I have an emergency fund, I'm saving for my future, and I'm living on a budget that works for me. But more than that, I'm living with a sense of freedom and empowerment that I never thought I'd feel. So if you're watching this and you're buried in debt, feeling hopeless and overwhelmed, I want you to know one thing. You can do this. It's going to be hard and it's going to take sacrifice, but it's possible. You don't need to be perfect and you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to take that first step and then the next one. Because if I can pay off 10,000 in 6 months, you can too.